I've been using the iPhone 16 Pro for about 4 months now, and my experience has kind of been a mixed bag. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot that the 16 Pro gets right, which is why I still keep coming back to it after using other phones, but there are some things that have felt a bit clunky versus previous releases, and there's also some things that I've had happen that I think are just important to be aware of. Today, I'm going to dive into what those things are, what makes this a great phone, and some things that you should definitely look out for. So if you're considering picking up the iPhone 16 Pro yourself, or you're just curious to know what my experience has been like, stick around and let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. I bought the iPhone 16 Pro on launch, and outside of a few weeks with the OnePlus 13, it's been my main device ever since. And to be honest, it's probably been the most eventful experience that I've had with a phone in a long time. A big part of that, surprisingly enough, is related to the design. The model that I have here is black titanium and has been incredibly solid and durable since I bought it, except for one instance that I'm gonna get into in a minute, but there are no scratches or dings anywhere, and the only complaint that I have with black is it shows dirt and dust a lot easier than other colors like natural or desert titanium. Outside that, the bezels on the 16 Pro are thinner than the previous gen, which I would say I don't really notice coming from the 15 Pro. But that was a source of a lot of grief for me, where I had my screen shatter along the edge of my phone from a harmless drop. And the crazy part was, it was actually in a case with a screen protector on when it fell. Essentially, I was just out on a run and I went to grab my phone to change the playlist that I was listening to, and the phone got stuck on the edge of my pocket and then just lightly tumbled out onto the concrete. And just to be clear, I don't think that was the fault of the phone or the small bezels, but more so the case and just hitting in the perfect spot. I had this Apple silicone case on here, and visually I just like the look of it between the color and the thin profile, but because it is quite thin and soft, if you hit it on a corner like I did, I do think it is more prone to damage than something like the Spigen case that I'm using now. Luckily, I did have Apple Care on my phone, and I think the screen repair ended up costing me $40 Canadian or so, which isn't bad at all, and ever since then, I've had no issues with the phone in terms of drops or durability, but I'll definitely be staying away from those Apple cases from now on. That being said, since having the screen replaced, which was only a few weeks into owning the phone, I haven't bothered to put another screen protector on it, and the display itself has virtually no scratches at all. It's been rolling around in my pockets with keys and loose change, and it's still good as new, as is the camera bump, which is also exposed without any protection. I've seen some people with a bit of wear on the finish around the metal rim on the lenses, but I've got nothing there or on the lenses themselves. And speaking of the cameras, that's probably been my favorite thing about this phone. More and more these days, I'd much rather just use my phone to take photos or even video at times over my mirrorless cameras, and I still think that the iPhone is unmatched in terms of a total camera system between both of those use cases. On the photo side of things, I think it's up to preference between photos coming off the iPhone versus other flagship devices. There really isn't a ton of difference these days in that regard, and I might actually prefer the stock colors you get off the OnePlus 13 over the 16 Pro. Stock iPhone colors can be a bit vanilla and they can be a little overprocessed, but having photographic styles within the camera app now has been useful with mitigating that and adding a bit more depth. And with a few clicks, I'm able to get some pretty stunning images without any additional editing. I've also enjoyed the 5x telephoto lens on the 16 Pro that moved up from 3x in the 15 Pro to match the Pro Max, which I found especially useful outdoors. It's quite sharp for a telephoto lens in a phone without too much noise, and the new 48 megapixel ultra-wide lens does seem to have a touch more detail this year as well. But for me, it's the video features that really set the iPhone apart from everything else. Believe it or not, I filmed quite a few clips for these videos on the iPhone 16 Pro in Apple Log, and the thing that I personally love about filming in Apple Log is not only is the image outstanding without any overprocessing that you see in the regular camera mode, but I am able to color match it to be almost identical to my Sony cameras, so it fits in quite well with my whole process. It can also film in 4K at 120 frames per second, which is a nice touch and can definitely be useful, but it will warm up and eat the battery if you're filming in Apple Log, especially in 4K 120, but that is probably the most taxing thing that you can do on the iPhone, and it handles it without any issues. Now, you do have the option of using the new camera control button both with photo and video, but I don't particularly like it. I thought maybe over time I would get used to it, but for the most part, it just results in me inadvertently taking a photo or changing a setting when I don't want to. And I know I always have the option to completely disable it, but there are two instances where I actually find it useful. One is when I'm outside and I've got gloves on and I want to use the camera, where it's just a lot easier to both launch the camera app and take photos with gloves on. And two, when you hold down on that button, it'll now go into visual intelligence, which is a part of Apple Intelligence. I didn't look at Apple Intelligence in my initial review because it wasn't yet released, and I did say that I would make a follow-up video covering it, which by and large has been pretty underwhelming. There are some neat features like visual intelligence where, like I said, holding down on the camera button opens that up where I can then take a photo of something and either search the web for info on it, similar to Google Lens, or I can ask ChatGPT if I want more information about whatever it is that I'm looking at. In the US, I believe you have more options where you can see business reviews, make reservations, or order food depending on the business that you take a photo of, but I'm in Canada, so I'm a little more restricted in that sense, but I would say that it is fairly useful nonetheless. Visual intelligence isn't the only place where you can use ChatGPT. Siri will sometimes reach for it if it thinks ChatGPT will be able to answer your question, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you can also use it in writing tools to compose text or generate an image, which works well enough, but I still prefer to use the ChatGPT app itself to do those types of tasks. When it comes to the writing tools themselves, they can be helpful at times for forming quick responses or rewording emails, but anything more than that, Apple AI can struggle with contextualizing complex information both in emails and notes. And it is quite a ways behind some of the other generative AI tools, but I still find it useful, and I do think that there is value in having it there. Coming back to Siri, I do like the new animation it got with the RGB gradient outline, but unfortunately, again, it's been really hit or miss for me in terms of new features actually working. There have been times where it just hasn't worked at all for me or doesn't respond to my voice, and I've had to toggle settings off or on or restart my phone to get it back working. And with something like the ChatGPT integration, I find it works intermittently, where, say if I ask it for a recipe, sometimes it'll reach for ChatGPT, sometimes I'll get the good old, I found this on the web answer, and sometimes it just won't work at all. Similarly, notification summaries where your messages are grouped together and you get a summary of what they all contain hasn't really been all that useful. They can be quite funny at times though. The image playground and Genmoji can be fun to tinker with, although I rarely use them. And probably the most useful feature, I would say, outside of visual intelligence and some of those writing tools would be cleanup in the Photos app, where it does a pretty good job at removing objects from images or pixelating things out. With that said, any of these features will warm up your phone considerably and can use up a lot of processing power, but nothing that I've noticed negatively impact my experience, and in a general sense, performance has been outstanding and I haven't noticed any slowness at all. In earlier videos, I benchmarked this 16 Pro and ran through a bunch of tests, so I'm not going to go over all that again, but I will say that just in on-paper performance, this does outperform the new Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset in single-core performance that we're going to see in a lot of new Android flagships. and it lags just behind it in multi-core, so I suspect it's going to be a bit of a wash comparatively with those new devices. The final thing that I want to talk about is the battery, which I would say has been pretty decent for a phone this size. You would definitely get better battery life with a Pro Max because it does have a bigger battery, but I get through a full day most of the time with casual use, and the only time that it bothers me or feels like it's not enough is when I'm trying to get more out of my phone. For example, this past week when I was upgrading my studio space, I had podcasts playing all day through my phone with the speaker at max volume, and I was using the flashlight on it a ton, and by 4 p.m. it was toast. I suspect if you were doing a lot of gaming or constantly working in apps like Lightroom and things of that nature, you would have a similar experience, but for what most people are gonna use their phones for, I don't really think you have to worry too much. I'm also still at 100% battery capacity, which isn't surprising considering that I've only got 75 cycles, and I do feel like it's generally lasted a bit longer than my 15 Pro. And it does charge noticeably faster as well with the new 25-watt MagSafe charger. The only thing that I wish that was available was a little more choice from third-party companies for wireless charging accessories that charged at 25 watts, but that is a pretty minor complaint, and everything else has been a pretty standard iPhone experience. I know everyone's experience is going to be different on these phones, and even though I felt some clunkiness with Apple Intelligence and had some oopsies with a screen replacement, I've rarely come across any issues with the iPhone 16 Pro. It is still my go-to device, although I am pretty excited to get my hands on some of the other new phones coming out right away, and I will have reviews for those as they come out, but I would love to know from you guys. If you have an iPhone 16 Pro, how are you liking it, and have you had any issues with it so far? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video or you found it useful. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content or help me build an AI conspiracy theory app that insists your appliances are spying on you, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.